Part 12. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 114. Lin Zhenying. Subai, read it again. Is this Zhen? Facing Subai's question, Liang nodded vigorously. Yes, the word Zhen is in the master's name. Subai squatted down, put a hand on his forehead, and then punched the rock in front of him. Oh shit. Subai was really angry now, and he also thought of the words of the monk that the fat man brought back before. This story world is a joke. Now it seems that this story world is really a joke, and apart from the monk, others have been participating in this joke. Moreover, this kind of thing is indeed in line with the style of horror broadcast. It makes a joke with all the listeners, and the price of this joke is the lives of the listeners. In order to protect a person who is not the target of the mission at all, he and others risk his life. How many risks have been taken and how many hardships have been encountered. Now, there must be great danger in that cave. Subai took a deep breath, exhaled it heavily, then grabbed Liang's neck with one hand and lifted Liang up. You said, not to kill me. Subai smiled and said nonchalantly. I'm sorry, I changed my mind. Besides, you almost killed me. I still hold grudges very much. Then, Subai pierced his fangs into Liang's neck. After a few minutes, Subai let go. Liang turned into a mummy and fell to the ground. Subai's lips also became extremely bright. Obviously, no matter how much medicine, no matter how much rest, no matter how much treatment, it is far less than the blood brought by a living person to restore oneself. Subai was like a person who had been hungry for a long time and finally had a full meal. The hidden wounds left by previous injuries were finally eliminated at this time. His body swayed slightly, feeling the feeling of satisfaction and physical recovery. He looked into the distance again. In the cave, white gas was constantly coming out, which meant that the temperature inside the cave was already lower than outside. I don't know if Fatty, Gyatso, and Lin Zhenying are still okay in the cave. However, these are not the things that Subai wants to care about now. The monk misled everyone into entering this cave, but the monk must have his own wishful thinking. Moreover, the most important point is that since the monk knows that this Lin Zhenying is not the Lin Zhenying of the main mission one, this means that the monk himself is sure of the real Lin Zhenying, and has even found it. Subai did not go to the cave to pick up the others. He left directly from here and went down the mountain. He deliberately speeded up. When he returned to the county town, there were basically no people on the streets. Subai walked directly to the gate of the county government office. Opposite the county government office, there was a wine shop with a closed sign. But on the second floor of the wine shop, there was a monk standing. The monk seemed to be here, waiting for Subai. Stretching out his hand to the people on the second floor, the monk nodded slightly, turned around and walked in. Subai entered the wine shop. The boss of the wine shop was settling accounts and the waiter was cleaning. Seeing Subai come in, the waiter shouted. Sorry to be objective, our house is closed. Subai pointed to the second floor. Hey, that's it, the master above has reserved the second floor for tonight, please. Subai refused the waiter's lead and walked up on his own. The monk sat at a table by the window. There was a pot of wine on the table and 3 dishes of side dishes, namely fennel beans, dried tofu, and peanuts. No meat. Subai sat up opposite the monk. Amitba, I am a monk. I've never seen you care about this before. Subai poured himself a glass of wine and took a sip. The alcohol content of the wine was not high and it tasted a little sweet. The world of this story is different. There are gods 3 feet above your head, and they are even closer. Subai nodded and understood. Obviously you can't see ghosts and zombies everywhere in the real world, which proves the difference between the real world and the story world. Here, it is more appropriate to have gods above your head. Even the monks are here. I have to be a little more cautious here. In fact, the monk is really a pragmatist. He is not limited to his status as a monk at all, but he can still give people the appearance of an enlightened monk. This is the monk's ability. Do you have many questions to ask? The monk also poured himself a glass of wine, then put it to the tip of his nose and smelled it without drinking. Sudbai ignored the monk and pinched 2 fennel beans and chewed them in his mouth. The fennel beans were very fragrant. The monk also knew what Sudbai meant, and he also knew Sudbai's character. Obviously, if he couldn't give a reasonable explanation, with Sudbai's style and habit of retribution, he might soon be plotting against him and them. It's about entering that cave. Actually, you don't have to feel guilty. You didn't go to the cave to look for them, right? The monk asked. Sudbai continued to eat beans, as if he was a little hungry, but still didn't reply. Actually, you still value friendship. I know that the monk set up this trap with the original intention of bringing Lin Zhenying in and letting him die. As for you not going in, I didn't expect it. The monk was very honest. Hey, Sudbai poured himself another glass of wine and waved the glass in front of the monk. Come on, I didn't have any trouble in the cave. Monk, do you feel too disappointed? Same, the monk said. I don't have time to fight with you, Sudbai warned. You know, I have a lot of story points left. The unspoken meaning of Sudbai's words is that if you continue to play tricks on me, everyone will be dead. The worst is that the reward for main task 1 will be lost. Failure will only deduct story points. Anyway, I have more than 800 story points, so I can withstand it. Starting buckle. You can't say that. In fact, the poor monk has been looking for an opportunity. The monk took off a string of Buddhist beads that he got from nowhere on his wrist, and started to pick them one by one with his fingers. Most of the rewards in the story world are opportunities to eat. Hearing this sentence, Sudbai thought of the time when he met the paper man in his second story world. In that story world, Sudbai won most of the rewards at the end, and Gongzihai and others it was just a sip of soup. Being able to completely grasp most of the story points of a story world is comparable to the reward income of spending 3 story worlds. This time, the poor monk feels that his opportunity has come. So you think that I, Gyatso, Fatty, and maybe other people who have slipped through the net are your potential competitors, so you just go with the flow and trap us first, right? Of course, the monk admitted generously, but that's good, that's good. Monk, what you said just now is like saying, hurry up and whip me, I can't wait any longer. Haha, the poor monk and the fat man once met in the demon cave, and the poor monk said something to the fat man. Is this story world a joke? Yes, that's it. The monk nodded, and then poured a glass of wine for Sudbai himself. Sudbai was not polite, just picked up the cup and drank it in one sip, then said, "It means that the horror broadcast uses the preconceived impressions of our listeners to implant a guy who is exactly the same as the actor Lin Zhenying in the real world, and then promulgates a main task 1, asking us to protect Lin Zhenying. In fact, it is to start with us. I made a joke, this Lin Zhenying is not Lin Zhenying, but Lin Zhenying. Actually, this is really funny, and it is in line with the usual style of horror broadcasting." The monk agreed, but in fact, this joke does not only come from this. Speak quickly, my patience has been worn out. I know that since you asked that Sow Fox to call me, you obviously want to ask me for help. In this case, the rules and information must be clearly stated. Otherwise, let's not say it yet. Do I want to continue to cooperate with you, the guy who just cheated me? Even if I do, you won't trust me, right? Yes. The monk picked up a piece of dried tofu with chopsticks, put it into his mouth, chewed it and swallowed it, and then spoke again. That demon cave was actually set up by a group of eminent monks who suppressed the demons many years ago. The demons there cannot leave at will. I know that. The poor monk's idea at the time was to gain as much inheritance as possible here, but he accidentally ran into that fox. I heard that you have a good relationship, and you are also heavy-handed. She was doing something. What to do? Abortion, she's banging her belly against the rock wall. Ha! Sudbai thought of the fox he saw. It was hard to imagine that the fox would actually do such a thing. Then what? Because in the demon cave, she is not only the only big demon, but there are also several demons whose strength is almost balanced. Her pregnancy is more like a natural pregnancy, not external fertilization, so once she gives birth, at that time, she will become very weak and may be taken advantage of by other big demons, so she tries her best to abort this child who appears out of nowhere. Continue. Sudbai grabbed a handful of peanuts, leaned on the chair, and ate the peanuts while listening to the story. Later, under the persuasion of the poor monk, she agreed to leave the demon cave with the poor monk and give birth to the child outside. The poor monk had a way to take her out of the demon cave together. This story is not attractive and has no climax. Sudbai looked very dissatisfied. The monk was silent for a while and continued. She suddenly had a whim and asked the poor monk to give her unborn child a name. Even if she planned to eat this child as soon as it was born to improve her own cultivation, she still felt that she should give it to herself. Give the child a name. Quite unconventional. Sudbai crossed his legs and threw a peanut into his mouth. The poor monk was thinking that the name of the story world is Mr. Zombie. The poor monk had also watched the movie of the same name at the beginning. At that time, he took a piece of broken jade ore that was very common in the cave and put it on it. Carve a name for her unborn child. Sudbai was stunned, took a deep breath, and looked at the monk, because Sudbai vaguely guessed a possibility. The name you, a monk, won't be. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 115. The name of your monk is not, Lin Zhenying, right? The monk was silent for a moment. At last. Nodded. Say a word. Yes. Sudbai directly picked up the wine bottle and poured it directly on the table in front of the monk. Monk, I'll give you a toast. The monk didn't take Sudbai's move seriously. Maybe most people thought that the other party was cursing him to death, but the monk was not an ordinary person. He knew that Sudbai would definitely have some reaction after hearing this, because of the process and result. It was really speechless. He himself was confused at first. He didn't know that because he randomly named an unborn child, the result would be such a sudden change. He just felt that since the world of the story it's called Mr. Zombie, so let's just respond to the situation and just name the child Lin Zhenying. The monk looked at Sudbai and continued. Then, just as I handed the piece of broken jade ore to the fox, the prompt for main mission 1 was released. Do you think this is a joke? Sudbai casually threw the wine bottle directly to the ground, and the wine bottle broke. The monk still sat where he was, remaining indifferent to Sudbai's actions. Are you sure the main mission 1 was released after you picked the name? Sudbai asked. The poor monk can be sure that when the fox took the broken jade ore with the name engraved on it, the main mission 1 sounded at the same time. Sudbai closed his eyes and began to recall the scene when he received the main mission 1. What was he doing at that time? In Sudbai's mind, a picture appeared. He had just come out of the coffin, knocked out Liang and Miss Chen, put them in the coffin, changed Liang's clothes, sneaked out secretly, and came to outside the living room. I looked into the hole in the window of the living room, and then I saw Lin Zhenying turning his face. When I finally realized that this person was exactly the same as the protagonist Lin Zhenying of the Hong Kong zombie movie I watched when I was a child, the main task of the horror broadcast 1 the prompt sounded, and it seemed that the time points matched well. But wait a minute. No, that's the problem. When he just came out of the demon cave, he had already met Lin Zhenying and started fighting. If he had triggered the main mission because he met Lin Zhenying while he was awake, he should have just come out of the demon cave and started fighting. It was triggered again during a fight with Lin Zhenying. At that time, he was injured and very tired, and he was quickly blown over by Lin Zhenying's Bagua mirror in the middle of the fight with Lin Zhenying. It was true that he did not see the Taoist priest clearly at that time. In terms of his true appearance, he didn't look exactly like Lin Zhenying. However, this is definitely not a prerequisite for triggering the main mission 1, because for someone like Gyatso, he has never seen zombie-themed Hong Kong movies, and he does not know Lin Zhenying at all, so it is impossible to set up a terrorist broadcast. I saw Lin Zhenying and discovered that this person looked exactly like the zombie movie star in the real world, to complete the conditions for triggering the main task 1. Based on this analysis, when I was leaning against the window and looking in, it happened to be the time when the monk handed the fox the broken jade ore engraved with the words Lin Zhenying. It turns out that the Taoist priest that he and others worked so hard to protect was really a fake, and here, the monk randomly named a child, and instead he became the target that everyone was required to protect in the main mission 1. This is really a big joke, so ridiculous. Where is that fox? In the backyard of the county government office. Subai took a deep breath and rubbed his face with his palms. He now wanted to know how Gyatso and Fatty would react when they knew about this. Of course, the premise was that they could come out of the cave in advance. With the monk's personality, he wanted to, if you want to eat alone to get rid of the yin people, this will definitely not be done lightly. Even if they survive, they will probably have to shed their skin, or at least lose the ability to continue competing with the monks for contribution points in this story world. Yes, seeing that Subai finally regained his composure, the monk nodded. What danger will he face down there? Subai asked. There is no danger for the time being, but on the day of delivery, her aura will be unable to be suppressed. Moreover, she has been seriously injured because she and the poor monk came out of the demon cave. Her strength is the same, and the aura on the day of delivery will be dispersed. If you go far, far away, you may attract many evil spirits and even so-called righteous metaphysics people. This is the most dangerous time. Subai licked his lips. You came to me because you were alone and worried that you wouldn't be able to handle it. The monk sat upright and said seriously, actually, even if I add you, I can't do it. You don't have to be so honest. Subai stood up and looked out the window, which was facing the county government office. The poor monk is going to set up a formation. The poor monk can do the formation. However, another person is needed to preside over it, so the poor monk thinks you can do it. Monk, how can I trust you? What if you trick me again? The monk shook his head. It's not necessary, because this is the main mission 1. After completing the main mission 1, there will be follow-up missions. If Fatty, Gyatso and the other listeners are all badly damaged, then the poor monk is left alone, so next, the poor monk will be responsible for a big task alone. Do you think the poor monk will be that stupid? Yes, you will, Subai said without hesitation. There are still a few days until delivery. If you don't count tonight, there are still 2 days left, and I will give birth the day after tomorrow, the monk replied. Monk, are you sure you won't take it off? Amitabha, wealth and honor are sought in danger. Okay, I promise you. Subai looked at the monk. I promise you. The monk didn't care whether Subai really agreed or not, and he didn't care whether Subai would do some unnecessary thinking, because this is human nature, and the monk didn't think he could solve it by thinking about it. However, he still has some confidence in Subai. This confidence is not based on the fact that Subai will not stab him in the back like he did. It is based on the fact that with Subai's intelligence, he will never stab himself in the back when he shouldn't. When he took action, he stabbed him with his tentacles. This understanding is enough. Come with me to see her, the monk said. Haha, it smells too bad, so I won't go, Subai replied directly. The monk was speechless for a while, and then tried his best to formulate his words. Actually, she has become a human now, which is, quite good. Subai touched his chin and looked at the monk, who looked a little embarrassed. Yeah, that's okay, I'll go take a look. The two left the wine shop and climbed in through the outer wall of the county government office. The county magistrate and his wife were so fascinated by the fox and the monk's magic that they gave them the best house to live in, while they lived in a side house. But at this time, the monks were too lazy to ask people to open the gate. For them, it was more convenient to walk through the wall. The woman was sitting at a stone table in the yard eating grapes. Her legs were shaking, her lips turned slightly, and she spit out a grape seed. At this time, although the woman saw the monk and Subai walking over, she pretended not to see them and continued to sit there eating grapes. This innocent appearance was really surprising. Subai had seen what this fox looked like when she was in bed. It was simply difficult to describe in words. But now, this woman was extraordinarily delicate, with a figure that could ignite a man's G-spot. Moreover, that kind of appearance seemed to come from the foxy aura emanating from the bone seems to make people feel that the bones are starting to become crispy just by looking at it. At this time, what Subai was thinking was, if he had seen a fox demon like this in his demon cave, would he have been able to control it? I guess there's nothing to resist even if you want to be a bastard. Hey, I'm living a good life in my childhood, Subai joked. Hee, here we come, monk. We agreed in advance that you have already taken one leg, so he should not worry about the other leg, the fox said directly. The monk smiled and shook his head. Hey, why can't I have it? Subai actually didn't understand what the legs they were talking about were, but he still had the ability to climb up by feeling the pole. He doesn't know, the monk said. Oh, the woman squinted at Subai. I still want to trick my sister. The fox is not stupid. In fact, she is just too lazy to think too much with Subai and the monk. If it were not to eat her own children, she would not follow the monk out here, nor would she need the monk and the person in front of her. Protection of. That's not right, the rain and dew belong equally. Subai sat down on the stone stool opposite the woman. Tell me, what legs? You should know if you should know. If you shouldn't know, you have no right to know. Give me my baby back. My teeth are itching. The woman hooked her finger, and the dagger on Subai's waist immediately flew up. This was originally a dagger used by foxes to grind their teeth, but it played an extremely important role in Subai's previous fight against the Zombie King. A dagger pierced the Zombie King. The evil spirit defense was still fresh in Subai's memory. How could Subai return such a good thing? With this dagger in hand, there is no need for him to compete with others every time he fights. Subai stretched out his hand and grabbed the hanging dagger. The woman was furious. How presumptuous. The force pulling the dagger strengthened again. Subai's eyes lit up, blooming with a faint green light. The zombie aura burst out from his whole body, and evil and dirty black smoke rose from Subai's feet. Buzz. The woman leaned forward, and Subai held the dagger completely in his hand. At the same time, Subai took a step forward and came directly to the woman. Snapped. A loud mouth slapped the woman on the face. The woman was immediately confused. The monk lowered his head and recited Amitba. Subai put baby on the woman's chest. You are really weak now, so don't show any pretense in front of me anymore. Also, tell me what that leg is, otherwise, I'll probably lose it. I can cut you off and go back to have fun. Dividing line. Please check your wallet again. Those who have monthly votes, please vote for the dragon. Hold on tight to the dragon. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 116. Subai is now like a street gangster who comes to collect protection money. You can't give it to me if someone else collects it. Without this rule, everyone who sees it has a share, and the rain and dew should be shared equally. It's not Sudbai's character to back down when it's time to get benefits, especially Sudbai won't be satisfied with just getting the little story points to complete the task. It's already obvious to the monk that with the other extra gains, he can't suffer a loss. The woman looked at Sudbai coldly. Although she did have a significant decline in strength due to pregnancy, which could be seen from the previous competition with Sudbai for Bapi, her majesty was still the same. There was indeed a look in her eyes. A great sense of oppression. However, Sudbai seemed to be indifferent, and continued to put the knife on her neck. Of course, she had been slapped before, so she didn't care about it anymore. "Monk, what do you say?" The woman looked at the monk standing aside. "You swore an oath with me to protect me until the child is born." Amitabha, the monk, clasped his hands together, looked at Sudbai, then at the woman, and said slowly, "He has no intention of killing you, nor does he intend to kill your child, so I don't want to do anything now. It's not a violation of the oath." Sudbai nodded. The monk's words were telling him his sense of propriety and bottom line. Above this sense of propriety and bottom line, he could negotiate terms freely. The monk had tricked him before, but now he began to benefit himself. This can be regarded as a kind of balance and compensation. Okay, people are indeed the most cunning and hypocritical things. There was a hint of evil in the woman's eyes. Obviously, she regretted following the monk and giving birth to a child like this. People like the monk simply don't. It's not something she can control easily. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Are you disrespecting me a little bit by ignoring me like this?" The woman spat. "You little ant, you really dare to bite your nose and face? Come on, attack me. Let me see if you dare." "Oh." Sudbai just responded lightly, and then there was the sound of a dagger entering flesh. The woman's eyes widened. She saw with her own eyes that the iron-cut Bapi pierced her chest. In the blink of an eye, the mountain on the left side of her chest was cut off. The scene suddenly became silent. Sudbai put the ball of white flesh in his hand, squeezed it, then put it in front of his nose, smelled it, stretched out his tongue, and licked his lips. This situation could be as perverted as it is. How perverted, Sudbai didn't realize it himself. What disgusting things have he not eaten now? I can swallow things like the Zombie King. This seems to be one of the cuter things I have faced during this period. Of course, for most men, this lump of flesh is only suitable for women. I have the urge to lick it. Once it is held directly in my hand, it will be too scary. You really. The woman suddenly felt like the sky was falling. She was slapped by Sudbai before, but she didn't take it too seriously because she was not a human being, but a monster. A beast does not have human values. To her, a slap is just a slap. It hurts a little and violates a little, but it does not have the dignity similar to a slap in the face for a human being. The feeling of being trampled. Pap. The towering piece of white meat was thrown to the ground by Sudbai, and rolled twice on the ground. Sudbai stretched out his foot and tapped the piece of meat with his toes. Hey, the elasticity is not bad, even if it leaves the body. But still looks very full and round. However, the good times did not last long. Not long after leaving the woman's body, the ball of white meat began to change, turning into something as huge as a cow, with dense black hair on it. It was originally a little bit like a cherry. Jiahong also became very thick and huge at this time. Sudbai had seen the fox's body before. It was very big and powerful. Her thing was originally like this, and it seemed that because she was about to give birth, the organs on her body instinctively began to get excited and develop further. Does the fox's blood taste good? Sudbai put his face in front of the wound. He really wanted to lick it, but he was a little afraid. Sudbai saw the tragic scene after the Zombie King was injected with evil spirit. I still remember it very clearly. The lessons learned from the past are still there, and I can't make the same mistakes again. The monk is still unmoved, but the fox is not so calm in his heart, and the whole person has even begun to tremble. Even a strong man, even a big demon, in the face of this kind of thing, when his strength has shrunk significantly, she will also be afraid. If she is not afraid, there is no need to leave the demon cave to give birth. Be good, don't be afraid. Subai slowly stabbed Bapi on the fox's belly again, piercing a little skin and bleeding a little. Then he gently slit it and drew a blood mark. Amitabha, enough is enough. The monk looked at Subai, then at the fox. Make a promise. The monk felt that enough was enough. In the monk's opinion, Subai's actions were nothing more than wanting a commitment that was the same as his own. In the monk's opinion, this was not impossible. In fact, the monk felt that if Subai could be just like him, if he gets a leg of the unborn child, Subai will do his best to protect the fox from giving birth safely so that he can share the spoils. Haha, the woman smiled at this moment, and then looked at Subai, quickly, kill me. At this time, the woman showed a special kind of perseverance, fear, after all, fear. As long as there is a spiritual being, there will always be that kind of instinctive fear of death and the end. However, she still chose to fight. If you have the ability, just kill me. A fox is a beast, no matter how smart it is still a beast. Pu Songling once said that the transformation of animals can be so deceptive that it only adds to the laughter. What's more, this fox is facing a character like a monk who doesn't know the depth and a ruthless character like Subai. Subai pursed her lips, looking a little aggrieved, and looked at the fox tremblingly. Don't force me, honey, really, don't force me. I'm not forcing you. Aren't you very arrogant and powerful? If you have the ability, just kill me. Come on, kill me. The woman roared hysterically. Obviously, her dignity was ruthlessly trampled on by Subai today, which made her a little out of control. Of course, the most important reason was that she did not believe that Subai would kill her. She had the confidence to do so. She still had to rely on her to give birth to the child, and the monk had sworn an oath with her. She didn't believe that this man dared to kill her. If he killed herself, he wouldn't get anything. Subai raised his head and looked at Chi Lu, who was walking slowly. Monk Kilo seemed to sense something and began to get closer. Monk, don't panic, don't move. Subai pointed at the monk. I've been a little tired recently, really, mentally exhausted, so don't provoke me, I'm so scared. The monk's eyes finally took on a different brilliance, and even became a little solemn. Monk, do you think it's interesting for us to go through so much trouble? Before the monk could answer, Subai answered himself. It's really boring. After saying that, the dagger in Subai's hand pierced the fox's belly directly. The fox was completely shocked, and the monk staggered, and suddenly knelt on the ground, with a look of pain on his face. Obviously, because he broke his oath, he began to suffer the backlash from the oath. The two parties swore an oath together and borrowed mana to carry the oath to heaven. In this story, heaven is more sensitive, so retribution comes faster. Subai continued to smile, and then slowly started to stir the dagger on the fox's belly. The fox's face was completely distorted because of the pain, but her eyes were still staring at Subai. How can it be? How can this be? How dare he do this? How could he do this? Main mission 1, let's just give up. Fatty and Gyatso still don't know if they are dead, and I have to keep an eye on each other here with you. I feel so annoyed, Monk, I know you are very smart. I know that I may be the extra one out of the plan, so I have always been very dissatisfied with your arrangements for me. Really, I feel that my situation is very embarrassing. I have to face dangers while not being able to guarantee equality. It's really annoying to have the advantage of trying to trick you back to get revenge. Also, Monk, you always seem to have pearls of wisdom, but I have always wanted to tell you that sometimes, when you see things and people, you may not be accurate. Real. For example, this time, you made a mistake. I don't know how you and her reached an agreement, and I don't know how you and her constrained each other to complete the agreement. I probably don't have that ability. Well, that's it. I'll give you a final piece of advice. No matter how good a person is at seeing people, they can't see through a psychopath. The fox immediately let out a roar and grabbed Baby with both hands, but Subai kicked him down. The fox was knocked to the ground, and a lot of intestines and other things began to flow out of his stomach, and even he was gradually unable to control the transformation. He has formed a human form, and black hair has begun to appear on his body. It is obvious that he is about to change back to his true self. Monk, you broke your oath. The fox howled and cursed the monk. It was the monk who brought this man here. It was the monk who watched helplessly as this man came to him. It was the monk who was indifferent to the harm and threats this man had made to him at the beginning. Now his stomach is covered. If it is punctured, the monk cannot escape the blame. In fact, the monk's eyes were now bleeding with blood and tears, and he was in great pain. Subai licked his lips, and Bapi drew a circle in his hand. However, at this moment, something as big as a palm rolled out of the fox's belly. Subai was stunned. It was a baby, but it should be a dead baby. After all, it was delivered early. Subai was already prepared to fail the main mission 1. He touched the baby with his toes. It was really small and in human form. What a pity, child. Although he was the executioner, Subai still held a moment of silence in his heart. But next moment, Subai's eyes suddenly opened wide. The baby covered in blood actually grabbed Subai's boots with one hand. Unexpectedly. Not dead yet. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 117. Although Subai couldn't believe it, it was indeed the case. When his toes touched Xiaolin Zhenying, he felt the baby pushing his solace with his hands. The force was very weak, but it was really there. He is exerting force. He's not dead yet. At this moment, Subai felt a great sense of absurdity. After all, you are not dead yet? Since he was not dead, Subai moved his toes away, then reached out and held the palm-sized baby in his hands. The fox, whose stomach had been smashed to pieces by Subai but was still alive, was staring at Subai's hand, his own child, the child he planned to eat as soon as he was born. This is considered premature birth, which is very harmful to the mother and the baby. For the fox, this will greatly reduce the effectiveness of the food she originally wanted to eat. Of course, this food is now in Subai's hands. Subai looked at the child. For a moment, he had the idea of eating the child. After all, he could roughly guess that the leg that the fox said he wanted to give to the monk was definitely not a chicken leg, but this child. Legs. This child should be a good thing, a bit like the Tang monk in Journey to the West. Although eating a piece of meat may not make you immortal, the effect will definitely not be bad, otherwise the monk would not have dared to break his own rules and precepts. Eat people in this story world. However, Subai, who was so eager to kill zombies, was a little hesitant about the little baby. He pursed his lips. Subai held the baby up and turned around to leave. Is it appropriate to just leave like this? The monk knelt on the ground with his hands on his hands, blood and tears dripping continuously, and his body was still shaking, which meant that he was suffering great pain. You have made an oath, right? And it seems that the effect of this oath is quite powerful. Monk, this is the first time I have seen you in such a mess. Subai turned his back to the monk and said, no matter what I did in the past, I always thought you were quite good. The eminent monk is romantic. Amitabha. The monk recited the Buddha's name and began to stand up slowly. It was difficult to stand up, but he still stood up. When it came to great perseverance, Subai felt inferior to this monk. I want to leave, and the child is in my hands. If you stop me, Monk, the worst I can do is not kill the child in main task 1. It has not yet reached the original delivery date, nor has it reached the protection date stipulated in main task 1. If I kill him now, will you be completely swallowed up by the oath and die? The monk said nothing, just stood up straight and looked at Subai. Subai shook his head. It turns out that you really agreed on the date, not until the child is born. Then, goodbye. When he saw Subai jumping out of the fence with the child and leaving, the fox turned his head and looked at the monk who was standing motionless and cursed. Are you dead? Why didn't you stop him? The fact that he didn't eat the child immediately means that he will not harm the child and will protect him. Oh, why are you so sure? Because he is a psychopath. The monk said this. You cannot use any rational thinking to see a psychopath. But before that, the monk had never seen the side hidden in Subai's heart. In fact, it wasn't that Subai hid it well, but that Subai himself had forgotten what he looked like. Subai did not leave the county town, but found a vacant house and went in. The owner of the house must have gone on a long journey. There was still water in the water tank at home, but there was no rice in the rice tank. Apparently, it had been prepared in advance. Be prepared in case your home is robbed. Subai wasn't hungry either. He lay on the bed with the child at the end of the bed. Just like that, Subai closed his eyes and started to rest. When it was dawn, nothing happened. Subai didn't think that the monk couldn't find him if he was so close to the monk. It was just that the monk didn't choose to come. Since the child was by his side, he had pinched the monk's life. If the monk came to the door and strangled the child to death, then the monk was really dead. However, the baby, who was just born and left alone on a cold, dry, and hard bed all night, was already motionless. Is he dead, that monk? Haha, I'm sorry, monk. Subai was lying on the bed leaning against his body, looking at the motionless baby. He felt surprisingly calm. Last night, he didn't know why he suddenly did that, flipping the table over without any hesitation. This was not in line with his usual thinking pattern, or it doesn't fit the way I deal with things after entering the story world. I have always been cautious before doing anything, and I would analyze the pros and cons before doing anything, but last night, I went crazy. He stretched out his hand and put it on his forehead. In fact, Subai felt a little unsure. The person he was last night was the real self, the most authentic self. In addition, the vampire blood and the zombie blood were two violent things. His bloodline is all in his own body, and all these plus his previous inner impulses, his extremely abnormal thinking mode, and his behavior under this thinking mode. It is the purest self. Originally, Subai thought that his mental illness would be ignored by him after he entered the story world, because in the story world, he often killed people, and he really killed people without blinking an eye. In the past, he had to rely on killing people to relieve his mental illness. It shouldn't be a big deal now. However, Subai was still wrong, very wrong. That kind of mentality and character were really like maggots on his tarsus, always lying on his body, following him like a shadow, and now, gradually, there is an expanding trend. The most important thing is, I don't dislike this feeling. Subai doesn't reject the feeling of disregarding and ignoring all constraints, and even, likes it. This is what your true self looks like. In Subai's mind, he vaguely saw a vampire standing in the sea of blood among the corpses, with red blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. He also saw a zombie roaring wildly on the pile of corpses. He placed his fist on the bed and made a soft sound. The baby suddenly trembled, then rubbed his eyes with both hands, looked towards Subai, and then grinned. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The baby opens its arms as if asking for a hug. Hee hee. Subai was amused by this guy. Even if he didn't die yesterday, he was left on the bed all night without any care last night and he is still alive. This vitality is really strong enough. Why does this guy need protection? Just find an inaccessible canyon and throw him down. You won't find it, and neither will the enemy. It's very safe. Sudbai got off the bed and reached out to hold the baby, but stopped midway. The baby was about to receive Sudbai's hug, but because of Sudbai's pause, his center of gravity was reversed, and he fell on the bed and turned over. His little eyes were full of doubts and confusion. The baby feels aggrieved. Sudbai clamped the baby's arm with his fingers and lifted him up. This position made the baby very uncomfortable. He wanted to grab Sudbai's clothes with his hands, but his little hands were not long enough. When Sudbai came to the water tank, kicked off the lid, and threw the baby directly into the water tank. Last night, the baby came out directly from the belly of the mother whose belly was cut, and there was still blood on it. Sudbai thought it was dirty, so he gave him a bath first. Of course, after throwing it in, Sudbai didn't say anything about helping him wash. Instead, he walked to the wellhead in the yard and hoisted a bucket of water to wash himself. About 5 minutes later, Sudbai came back. The baby was floating face up on the water tank, and his two little legs kept pushing on the water, making him circle back and forth in the water tank. He was having a great time playing with it. Sudbai found a piece of clothing from the room of this family, tore it open, walked to the water tank, grabbed the baby, wrapped it in cloth, and walked out. It was already morning. Sudbai walked into a noodle shop. For him, blood was a wartime necessity, but it did not mean that he no longer needed to eat. Sudbai was far from being able to live without food. After asking the boss for 2 bowls of clear soup noodles and 2 poached eggs, Sudbai chose a corner seat and sat down. Put the baby on the chair. The baby was sucking his thumb. Then he looked at Sudbai. Seeing Sudbai looking at him, the baby immediately grinned and kept making sounds in his mouth, but he didn't know what the hell he's talking about. 2 bowls of noodles and poached eggs arrived. Sudbai ate the noodles first, ignoring the baby. When he finished the 2 bowls of noodles, Sudbai saw that the baby's eyes were watery when he looked at him, and there was drool dripping from the corners of his mouth. Sudbai picked up a poached egg and threw it directly on the baby's face. The baby immediately grabbed the poached egg with both hands, and then ate it bit by bit with his small mouth. A newborn baby can eat poached eggs with his own hands, which is considered a blessing. It was an anecdote. Of course Sudbai knew that this baby must be unusual, otherwise the fox and the monk would not want to eat him. After finishing eating and paying the bill, Sudbai suddenly didn't know where to go. The protection target of the main mission was finally beside him this time. There was still the oil stain of the poached egg on his face, and he was sucking his fingers from time to time. Master Lin is back. Master Lin is back. Someone was beating gongs and drums and shouting. Many neighbors gathered on the street and cheered Lin Zheniying's return. The news that several mountain villages were attacked by zombies has spread to the county town, making people in the county town panic. They all hope that Lin Zheniying can help them get rid of the zombies. Sudbai stood in an inconspicuous position, looking across the crowd at Lin Zheniying, who was sitting on the bullock cart over there. His hair was disheveled, his robe was torn, and his eyes were dull. Sitting next to Lin Zheniying, Gyatso had one arm missing and a terrible scar on his face. The fat man was lying on the bullock cart. His skin was frighteningly white. As a zombie, Sudbai knew that the fat man was much worse this time than last time. This time, the corpse poison attacked his heart. The baby seemed to be joining in the fun with the crowd, clapping his little hands and shouting along with the people around him. Sudbai looked at the baby in his arms, and then at the people on the bullock cart. Suddenly I felt like this scene. How ironic. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 118. Sudbai did not go to Yizhuang, not because he killed Liang, because Sudbai knew that he had killed Liang. Unless the monk suddenly got jealous and reported it, Lin Zhenying and the others would not know that he might suddenly commit the crime. A mentally ill person like a monk would not suddenly lose his temper. The most important thing is that as a member of a temporary team, I quit at the last moment of entering the hole. I didn't say anything about going in, nor did I say to be a supporter. Although in fact, even if he went to rescue and notify, the result would probably not change, and it might even be too late at all. But things happened after all. Fatty and Gyatso did not die, which made Subai feel a little troublesome. If the two of them really died, he and the monk would be the only ones left in the story world, even if there were a few more people who slipped through the net. Listeners, it's a little clearer. After opening a room in an inn, there was still one day left before the end of main task 1. Subai felt that if he just went through it peacefully, it would be a good result to end main task 1 and then go to the next main task 2. Compared to Fatty, Gyatso and even the monk, his current state should be the best to adjust and recover. Before entering the story world and shortly after entering the story world, the three of them formed a team, and their relationship and cooperation were good. However, once they encountered matters related to interests, they suddenly stood on the side of their own best interests, and the team also they broke up all of a sudden, which didn't surprise Subai, because it was a natural thing. The baby was placed on the ground by Subai and crawled by itself. Subai really didn't look good as a father. He was just a hands-off shopkeeper. Of course, this child was not Subai's, but Subai didn't need to worry too much about this child. The vitality is very tenacious, so there is nothing wrong with just throwing it on the ground and letting him play by himself. If Subai hadn't suddenly gone insane that night, this guy wouldn't have been born yet. However, this child had a good impression of Taoist Subai. He crawled to the bed several times and opened his hands to say please give me a hug to Subai, who was lying on the bed and squinting out the window. In the end, he was kicked by Subai. When he went down, the guy who looked thin and tender but was actually rough and thick didn't feel any pain and was fine. However, he still came up to ask for a hug every once in a while, and then was kicked down by Subai. This was not a good thing for this baby. It's like a game, I really enjoy it. When night fell, Subai ordered some food and wine, put the child on the table, and threw him a chicken drumstick. The baby put the chicken legs on the table by himself, and then lay on the chicken legs to gnaw. With the body of a baby just a few days old, it is obviously a bit unrealistic for him to sit and grab the chicken legs to eat. When he eats on his stomach, his little buttocks are white and tender. Just swaying towards Subai. Subai took a sip of wine and slapped the baby's butt. The baby didn't cry or fuss. He changed his position with a smile and continued to lie down and eat the chicken legs. Seeing the little guy's expression of satisfaction as he ate the greasy chicken legs, Subai suddenly felt as if something had been touched deep in his heart. In his mind, he thought about the first time he would be alone after his parents passed away. For the first time, I was sitting at the dining table facing a table of dishes and eating alone. Closing his eyes, Subai began to force himself to suppress that emotion. He didn't want to let his emotions be affected by this kind of thing. This was the story world. Even if it seemed calm now, it would never be smooth sailing. When Subai opened his eyes, he saw the little guy crawling in front of him and pushing the half-eaten chicken leg to Subai's table. A pair of watery eyes was looking at Subai. Obviously, he couldn't speak. But he could sense Subai's emotional changes with a pure heart. Subai looked at the half-eaten chicken leg in front of him, nodded, picked it up and took a bite himself. The little guy became happy then, and then he came to Subai's wine glass, stuck out his tongue and took a sip, and then immediately started rolling on the table and dancing, obviously being spicy from the wine. Hee. Subai suddenly felt that this little guy was quite interesting. At this time, someone knocked on the door. Subai knew that someone would come and guessed who would come, so he asked the store to prepare wine and food in advance. Come in. Sudbai poured wine into the wine glass opposite. Gyatso closed the door, walked in and sat down opposite Sudbai. Without being polite, he picked up the wine glass and drank it all in one gulp. Then Gyatso shook his head and looked at Sudbai. If you want to explain that thing, I don't want to hear it. The thing Gyatso was talking about was the incident of entering the cave. I didn't want to explain that matter. Gyatso was very direct, and Sudbai was naturally very direct as well. In fact, I don't think I need to explain that kind of thing. Yes, are there still a lot of incidents where the audience stabs each other? Do you still need to explain? Everyone is a listener, not an experiencer. It is actually unnecessary to struggle with this kind of issue. It is like two armies fighting. Do we have to wait until both sides have put their artillery and infantry in position and established an air force and airport before they meet to start a war? Then what does today mean? Gyatso put one hand on the table, not touching the dishes, but tapping his knuckles lightly on the table. Gyatso is very similar to a monk to a certain extent, that is, he is calm and terrifyingly calm. No matter when, he seems to have never been emotionally disturbed. He has always adhered to his own style, maintained his own style, and was not moved by external things. Is Fatty okay? Sudbai asked. It's hanging. I guess it's good if it can be delayed until the end of the story. Gyatso looked at Sudbai and said. Yes, how about you? Can't you see what I look like? One of Gyatso's arms is gone, and the empty cuff on the right is still shaking slightly. Sudbai nodded. Today, I just want to buy you a drink. The rest is gone. I've already drank the wine from the beginning to the end. Gyatso was staring into Sudbai's eyes. Then you can leave. Sudbai continued directly. Gyatso smiled, stood up, pointed to the baby on the table. Who is he? I haven't seen him for a few days and he has opened a shelter in the story world. He is a joke, Sudbai said. This joke is naturally not just about the baby, but also includes Gyatso and Fatty. For a fake unrelated person, one was poisoned and the other lost an arm. If not a joke, what is it? Well, that's a joke. Gyatso turned around and walked out of the room. He came and left simply. Sudbai looked at the little guy lying obediently on the table. He was probably afraid of Gyatso's aura, so he became extra quiet after Gyatso came in. However, Sudbai couldn't figure it out. Shouldn't the aura on his body be more terrifying? What? Why is this guy not afraid of him at all? Is it because he is his midwife? Opening the window, Sudbai's room faced a small river. Standing here, you can see Gyatso walking back to Yizhuang. The scenery here is also good, not like the high-rise buildings in the real world. I want to find a small bridge. The quietness of running water is a difficult thing. Gyatso didn't seem to know that Sudbai was watching him from the windowsill behind him, and he still walked back at his own pace. He held the empty cuff directly in his other hand. Obviously, what Sudbai said when he left, in short, it still had an impact on Gyatso's heart. The shaking cuffs were a silent mockery of him. The little guy jumped off the table, and then climbed to Sudbai's feet. Sudbai squatted down, reached out to pick up the little guy, and put him on the windowsill. The little guy was so excited that he kept fluttering his arms, little hands and feet. He had just arrived in this world a few days ago and was so curious about the world. However, if Sudbai hadn't gone berserk that night, his fate might have been to be eaten as soon as he was born. At this time, looking forward, Gyatso's figure has disappeared and must have left. A butterfly flew into the window and landed on the little guy's bald head. The little guy looked up, as if he was afraid of scaring the butterfly and didn't dare to move. Sudbai stretched out his hand to catch the butterfly, and then placed it in front of the little guy. The little guy was very excited. Looking at the butterfly, he thought it was a beautiful thing. Who knew that as soon as the little guy's head got close to the butterfly, Sudbai's hand let go, and the free butterfly flew away. The little guy leaned forward to reach the butterfly, but lost his balance and fell from the window. He kept staring at Sudbai, but found that Sudbai didn't reach out to catch him at all, and tears of grievance appeared in his eyes. Then, with a pop sound, the little guy fell into the river. Sudbai turned around and turned his back to the window. Boom! The door of the guest room collapsed in an instant, and among the dust, Gyatso's figure appeared. Sudbai clapped his hands and looked at Gyatso, who was leaving and returning. "Give me that doll." One of Gyatso's eyes seemed to have come alive, turning red, and the color was constantly changing. At this time, Gyatso was very scary. He was possessed by a demon. Sudbai shrugged, as if he didn't understand. "I can understand that the monk is deliberately plotting against us. I can understand your leaving without saying goodbye. But I can't understand you taking that little thing with you and doing nothing. If you had eaten him a long time ago, I would understand and I would not say anything and would not come back again. This is a personal matter. If you eat him, it is your ability. I have no complaints at all. But since you don't eat him..." "How?" Sudbai asked. Gyatso's bloody pupils shrank suddenly, and he answered seriously. "Then I'll eat." Sudbai smiled and said nothing. "This is the story world. Everything here exists to kill us or make us stronger. What are you thinking in your head?" Gyatso's momentum was rising, and Sudbai began to press forward. Sudbai pointed to his face and asked, "Did the monk tell you what I look like?" Mental illness. Gyatso took the initiative to walk towards Sudbai, on the verge of breaking out. Sudbai nodded. "Now it's right. I'm mentally ill. You actually ask me why. Are you stupid? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 119. The monk was sitting by the bed, holding a small bowl with millet porridge in his hand. At this time, he was feeding the fat man little by little with a spoon. The fat man was leaning on the pillow beside the bed, looking a little uninterested. Gyatso went to find him. The fat man asked after swallowing a mouthful of porridge. "Don't you know everything?" The monk put the bowl on the bedside and poured himself a glass of water. The reason why the fat man became like this was actually because the monk had tricked him behind his back. He knew this, and the monk took the initiative to say it. However, like Gyatso, they actually didn't care too much about it. After all, it was this kind of thing is too common among listeners in the story world. Whoever gets more benefits depends on his skill. There is nothing to say. Tell me, what's wrong with him? He suddenly left that child without food. The fat man moved his back and found a more comfortable position. Actually, you should be the one who feels more unbalanced, monk. You have been with that fox for so long, served for so long, worked hard for so long, and even tried to trick us into a hole. In the end, you didn't get anything you wanted, even if you calculate it based on contribution. Haha, it was Sudbai who made the child born prematurely and stayed with him all the time. Even if Sudbai doesn't eat the child and survives this main quest for one time, his contribution is definitely the highest, and may even reach more than 90%. I know you, the monk, don't care about that little story point, but that child, it should be very beneficial to eat, otherwise you, a Central Plains monk, would not be tempted, but now the bamboo basket is empty. Just as you know that the poor monk has tricked you, you will be filled with hatred in your heart, but you won't turn your back and take action now, because the main mission one is not over yet, and no one knows what the remaining missions are. So, the poor monk actually didn't think much about it. Everyone depends on their ability and skill. Whoever can eat more will be the one who has the ability. Duplicitous monk, the fat man muttered, and then suddenly smiled. You said, that guy Abai is really crazy, and suddenly he is more compassionate than you, a monk, so he keeps that child with him and refuses to eat. Well, does he want to wait until the child grows up and has more meat before eating it? The monk shook his head. It was born prematurely, and only 80% of the spiritual energy is left. The longer the time goes by, the more the spiritual energy will dissipate, and the more it will be absorbed by the child's own body, and the less efficient it will be to eat him. The poor monk didn't think it before, but now I feel that he might really be suffering from a simple mental illness. In the story world, it is really difficult to understand that people suddenly act without considering the pros and cons. The fat man looked at the teacup in the monk's hand. Monk, give me a glass of water too. I just had a meal and drinking water is not good for digestion, the monk said seriously. Damn, I'm so young, it's fine. I'm not old enough to take care of myself yet. Hey, I don't know if I can live to be old. But good people don't live long, the monk made a pun. Well, I'm really crazy, talking to a monk like you who knows how to deceive people. By the way, monk, who can win between Abai and Gyatso? Abai has been a little evil lately, but even though Gyatso was injured and had an arm broken, I still think Gyatso has a greater chance of winning. Tibetan Tantra is so mysterious and has so many resources. Things exchanged in the store and harvested in the story world. It is really difficult for people to see through people like him and you. There is a vast treasure around you, and you are much happier than Diozi like me. The poor monk also thinks that Gyatso's confrontation with Subai is not a big problem, but what? Mental patients cannot be treated with common sense, the monk sighed. If Subai really didn't hesitate to take his own life, and he didn't hesitate to completely harm both sides, or even a complete death and injury, do you think Gyatso would really do it? Do you want to continue gambling like this with him? You can't, right? There's no need to be so crazy, and Big Fatty muttered. There is nothing he can't do. He cannot be analyzed in terms of pros and cons. This is what you said before. The poor monk feels that since the child is still alive and Subai did not eat him, then he has no reason to let others. If you go and eat him, once he really goes completely crazy, it's really unknown who will win, Gyatso or him. This is the kind of thing that scares you so much that you're stunned, isn't it? Yes. The monk stood up and looked at the fat man. You can't cure your corpse poison now. I know that I will probably have to stay in bed for the rest of this story world. I would be very grateful if you could keep me alive. The monk shook his head. Although the poor monk sees that you are miserable now, and you are indeed miserable, the poor monk doesn't believe that you will really lie here until the end of the story. Why? No matter when, leaving yourself a backup plan is a necessary preparation for all listeners, but for you, it is actually more like an instinct. Oh my God, monk, I really don't have it this time, I swear. The monk pointed his finger upward. In this story world, there are gods at the top of your head, and the effect of swearing is more serious than in the real world. The fat man was stunned. The monk sighed, turned around, and left the room. Yizhuang seems very deserted now. After Lin Zhenying came back, he locked himself in the room. It seemed that he was injured or had some other accident. The monk has noticed this, but the main task one is not over yet. The monk will not go out to alert the snake. After leaving Yizhuang and returning to the county government office, on the bed in the side room, the half-human, half-animal fox was lying on the bed, but her body was wrapped with many bandages of various kinds, and her wounds were bandaged very delicately. However, these bandages contain the concept of a formation that binds her here. When the monk came in, the fox slowly opened his eyes and looked at the monk who walked in. I feel that even if I don't need to apply the medicine you made, it will only be a matter of time before I get better. The monk knew what the fox meant. She was saying that he was putting her under house arrest in disguise. It seemed to be for her own good, but in fact, he was imprisoning her here. The purpose was self-evident. When making a pot of tea, most people only pay attention to the tea leaves and the taste of the tea, but rarely pay attention to the fact that teapots are sometimes extremely expensive. The monk walked over with a smile. The injury has recovered well, and it is estimated that he will be able to go to the ground the day after tomorrow. Walking. Monk, you are so opportunistic. Do you really think you can hide it from God? The monk coughed slightly and smiled. I'm doing this for your own good, poor monk. The fox seemed to have accepted his fate and stopped talking about it. He just snorted coldly and asked, I can sense that my child is not dead yet. The monk nodded. He is indeed not dead yet. Didn't that person eat him? The monk shook his head. If he really ate him, then there would be no need for so much trouble now. The debate on main task 1 is over. No matter who was cheated or got the advantage, everyone can sit down quietly and wait for the main task. Release of mission 2. Do you know the reason why he did that? The fox stared at the monk and did not wait for the monk to answer. Cats have a cat path, rats have a mouse path, humans have a human path, ghosts have a hell path, and monsters have a demon path. You mean, he is looking for his own way? The fox shook her head slightly. Most of her body was locked, and only her head could move slightly. It's not that you're looking for it, but that you've already found it. Monk, don't you think it's ironic? You didn't even fully grasp your own way, but you found that person first. The poor monk still prefers to believe that he is just mentally ill. The monk looked at the fox. Then we'll wait and see. The time I swore to protect you will end tomorrow. The monk said this, then blew out the lights in the room, walked out of the wing, sat cross-legged outside the door, facing the starry sky, silent. The tranquility over there cannot cover up the excitement here. Gyatso is the kind of person who either doesn't do something or does it as fast as the wind. He has already explained his intention to Subai, but Subai doesn't agree. Then, the rest will be solved with fists. A ball of black energy boiled from Gyatso's body, and his figure appeared directly in front of Subai. He formed a seal with one hand and blasted out a fierce hand seal. Subai blocked his arms in front of him and forcefully, after enduring the handprint of this blow, his legs also sank into the floor. It was obvious that the floor of this inn could not withstand the aftermath of the fight between these two people. Gyatso rose into the air and kicked towards Subai with his legs. Subai still held up the opponent's feet with his palms and was in a passive defensive state. In the end, half of his body had sunk under the floor. Gyatso's purpose was not to kill Subai, but the child. Seeing that Subai was suppressed by him, he immediately grabbed the edge of the window with one hand and prepared to jump into the river. At this moment, Subai let out a long roar, slapped one palm on the floor, and flew into the air. He grabbed Gyatso's ankle with the other hand, then exerted force on his waist, and turned around in the air, turning around. Gyatso, who jumped out of the window, was pulled back and dropped to the floor. At the same time, Bapi appeared in Subai's hand, first quickly got close to him, and then stabbed Gyatso's neck with his dagger. Gyatso's eyes were focused, and his figure slid on the floor, quickly came to the door, and then floated up and stood on the ground. Subai did not take advantage of the situation to pursue him, but stood on the spot, holding the dagger horizontally and looking at Gyatso. Are you serious? Subai shook his head. Are you still pretending? Dividing line. Yesterday I wrote a chapter with a little bit of content, and then Long was shocked to find that the number of rewards was almost 200, which was comparable to the number of people on the day it was put on the shelves. Suddenly I felt that you are so dirty, a bunch of dirty demon kings. Let me declare that this is a very pure book written by a very pure author. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 120. I'll take it seriously. Gyatso's only remaining hand was placed on his forehead. I'm not lying to you. Stop talking nonsense. Subai didn't appreciate it at all. In fact, when Gyatso released enough of his own setbacks and reminders, according to normal thinking, Subai should also give the other party a step down. After all, the main mission 1 has not ended yet, and it is unknown what tasks will come next. It is really unwise to work hard at this time. Subai also thought that what he did that night was just an indirect mental disorder, but now I have discovered that maybe this is my true self. Gyatso stopped talking nonsense, a blush appeared between his eyebrows, and then he shot a beam of light straight towards Subai. The surrounding air began to emit white smoke because of the heat of the beam. Subai held Bapi in front of him and blocked the light beam with the side of the dagger. He immediately felt the dagger getting hot, but not to the point of being hot. The light beam spread out and scattered into many points, covering Subai's surroundings. Click to start the series connection. Although Gyatso just said that he was going to be serious, when he took action, he still chose to trap Subai first. The next moment, Gyatso rushed to the window again. When enveloped by these beams of light, Subai felt that his breathing became a little difficult. Seeing Gyatso about to flash past him, Subai raised his head and let out a roar. His body began to lose weight, but this time it was different from the zombie state before. Now Subai's zombie state has become a zombie state. It has an evil and dirty aura, but it still looks like a human being. It has become more like a European and American zombie. At the same time, there is more of a hysterical aura. Boom! Subai's chest hit the beam, and the beam trembled. It was invaded by Subai's evil spirit and began to split. When it hit for the second time, the beam fell apart. Gyatso just jumped out of the window and landed by the river. Before he could stand firm and search for the baby's position, he suddenly raised his head and prepared to dodge, but Subai almost swooped down head first, holding Gyatso's neck with one arm, and the two of them they fell into the river together. The river was not very fast, but the two people never emerged. The two sides were fighting in a very primitive way at the bottom of the river, and the mud at the bottom of the river was also stirred up. In the end, Gyatso's kick hit Subai's abdomen, and Subai's punch hit Gyatso's shoulder. The two of them were knocked out of the water by each other and landed on the shore. Gyatso's body was shrouded in black mist, and he was leaning on the ground with one arm, half kneeling, staring at Subai. Subai was sitting on the ground with one knee, evil energy flowing around his body, and an extremely calm look on his face, with no trace of sadness or joy. After a few moments, both parties took a breath of fresh air and almost jumped up together. The river was not very wide, so the two sides collided together in the center of the river. A handprint appeared in Gyatso's palm, and he patted it in front of Subai's face. Subai's baby dagger appeared silently at this time, and was taken by Subai from bottom to top and stabbed towards Gyatso. Neither side seemed to have left any room, especially Subai, who simply ignored Gyatso's handprint. It seemed that he had no intention of avoiding it from the beginning, but was preparing to die with the other party. Finally, Gyatso stopped his hand and hit his palm print in the air. He used the counter-shock force to retreat. However, Subai was unyielding. Bapi could not stab Gyatso in the stomach, but he was still take advantage of the situation and lift it up. In the end, Gyatso fell back to the shore, and Subai fell into the water. Gyatso stood on the shore, but blood kept dripping out. From the lower abdomen to the lower jaw, a wound and a bloodline were so conspicuous. Subai walked out of the river step by step and walked to Gyatso. He had nothing to do. When he was desperate, or even when he was trying to change his life, Subai didn't flinch at all. It was Gyatso who retreated, and in the end, when Gyatso retreated, Subai showed no mercy and left him a souvenir. In terms of strength, between Subai and Gyatso, Gyatso actually has the upper hand. However, Gyatso is already injured now, and now one of his arms is broken. His strength is greatly damaged. Of course, the most important thing is that Subai's desperate posture made Gyatso very upset. Is it worth it? Gyatso looked at the bloody wound on his body. It's nothing, not worth it. Subai bent down silently, stretched his body, and roared like a wild beast in his throat, preparing to launch the second round of offensive. You are provoking me. You know that I will not really fight you. Gyatso's breathing began to become faster. The wounds caused by Bapi did not seem to have any special effect, but the absolute sharpness itself, it's extremely scary. Gyatso tried to use his own muscles to press the wound and stop the bleeding, but failed. The wound did not seem very serious, but the bleeding could not be stopped. This was very difficult. Not to mention continuing to fight, it was simply even standing here without moving, Gyatso could feel himself getting weaker. Okay, I give up, okay, Gyatso sighed, turned around, and prepared to leave. Subai didn't say a word, but his actions were the best proof. He took the initiative to rush towards Gyatso like a cheetah. Gyatso was angry, really angry. He turned around, tore off his clothes, and quickly recited an obscure spell. A wolf totem on his chest seemed to come to life at this time, and directly interacted with Gyatso. Measures combined into one. Ouch! A wolf howl pierced the sky. The fat man who was lying on the bed and drawing the talisman with great difficulty suddenly raised his head and muttered to himself in surprise, why do you want to make it so intense and howl like a ghost? At the same time, the fat man subconsciously looked through the window at Lin Zheniying's room, and found that Lin Zheniying's room was still lit with lights, his figure was very clear, and he was still sitting at the table, motionless. Okay, there's no movement here. It seems that old Lin hasn't recovered from what happened last time. He doesn't care that he has lost one of his apprentices. The fat man stopped thinking about other things and continued to draw the talisman. The monk sitting cross-legged and meditating at the door also opened his eyes slightly at this time, clasped his hands together, and recited Amitabha. I don't know who the phrase Amitabha was recited to. Gyatso's body speed suddenly more than doubled at this moment. Before Subai could get close to him, he stepped around to the side of Subai, strangled Subai's neck with one hand, and then kicked the ground with one leg. The two men hugged each other and rose to a height of 7 or 8 meters. Both sides were in the air, unable to borrow power from the ground. Immediately afterwards, Gyatso turned upside down and fell downwards with Subai at an extremely fast speed. The moment he touched the ground, Gyatso let go and stepped away. Boom! Subai's whole body hit the ground, making a pit. Gyatso stood on one side and held up a stone pier by the river with one hand. He slowly walked to the edge of the pit and smashed it into the pit. Boom! The ground also trembled at this time. You want to die, you are looking for death. The depths of Gyatso's pupils were already red and black. After being possessed by the demon, Gyatso's temper became very violent, and here, Subai successfully triggered the anger buried deep in Gyatso's heart. Gyatso bent down, lifted the stone pillar again, and then smashed it down again. Keep smashing. Smash it hard. Smash it hard. Smash it hard. Gyatso himself was almost knocked out of strength. When the wolf totem reappeared in his chest, and when his breath finally began to become disordered, he sat on the ground slumped, supporting the ground with one hand, and tilted his head to breathe heavily. He was tired, very tired. In fact, the fight between him and Subai was not very long, but he even inspired the accompanying totem to use it. The big reason was because Subai tried his best to fight with a determined murderous intention from the beginning. Taking action, this forced Gyatso to do his best to deal with it. Shidunza suddenly shook, and then was pushed away from the inside. One hand was placed on the edge of the pit, and then the other hand. Then, a man with blood on his head crawled out of the pit. There were wounds everywhere on his body, and the flesh in many places had been smashed. It was cracked open, with the bones exposed, and the injury on the head was even more serious. Blood kept flowing out, but not a drop of blood fell on the ground. Subai staggered out of the pit and stood in front of Gyatso, overlooking Gyatso. He, cough cough. Gyatso began to cough. I won't play anymore. If you want to kill, just kill him, you lunatic. Subai slowly walked up to Gyatso. Gyatso looked at Subai and then closed his eyes. Snapped. Gyatso's face was pressed against Subai's palm, and then his whole face was pressed to the ground by Subai. Subai also pressed Gyatso's body. Gyatso had given up resistance. Subai's baby had been placed on Gyatso's neck at this time. In fact, blood began to flow out from Gyatso's neck. The blood from the wound on his chest had already stained the blood. The lower part turned red. Subai stuck out his tongue, licked Gyatso's earlobe twice, then blew into Gyatso's ear, and then said in a low and hoarse voice, "Did I let you go just now?" Gyatso said nothing. He was so weak that it was difficult to speak. Subai stood up from Gyatso, and baby was held in Subai's hand. "Okay, now you can leave." After finishing speaking, Subai turned around and wandered towards the lower reaches of the river. As he walked, he had to hold onto the surrounding stones or support the ground with his hands. It was enough to show that he was actually at the end of his strength, but he persisted. In the end, he breathed more than Gyatso. Gyatso coughed up a mouthful of blood and was still lying on the ground. This is crazy. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 121. Late at night, Subai was walking downstream along the river alone. He was not walking very fast because he had injuries on his body. After walking for more than 3 hours, his injuries were basically healed. 7 or 8, but this also took away almost all the strength in his body. Finally, he couldn't walk anymore and sat down against a stone by the river. There are a lot of mosquitoes at night by the river, but Subai doesn't attract mosquitoes. But it's precisely because of this that there are no mosquitoes to bother her, but it makes her feel particularly lonely. Subai is not afraid of loneliness, he has long been used to it. He had been enduring and getting used to this feeling since his parents left. He picked up some river water and brought it to his dry mouth. The river water had a bit of earthy smell. After taking a few sips, Subai spread his arms and stretched out, preparing to stand up, but due to lack of strength afterward, Subai failed. The fight with Gyatso almost drained Subai of all his strength, but Subai had nothing to regret. He no longer wondered if he was still in the illness stage. In fact, a long time ago, the murderers had just begun to establish when the club killed someone for the first time. Subai clearly realized that the person he was when he killed might be his true self. Take a deep breath and let it out heavily. Subai didn't know where the little guy had drifted down the river, and he didn't know if he could find it again. Forget it, stop looking for it. That guy was able to swim comfortably in the water tank on the first day after he was born. He definitely couldn't drown. Subai closed his eyes and started to rest directly. That night, Subai lay down by the river and fell asleep. When the morning light first appeared, the dew gathered, giving it a slightly foggy feeling, and a fishing boat broke the tranquility here. During the Qing dynasty, the population had not yet reached the big explosion period of later generations, and this was not an important town or a famous city in ancient times. The population was not very dense, and basically there were only scattered villages outside the county seat. So that night, Subai slept peacefully. "Hey, young man, what's wrong with you?" Standing on the fishing boat was an old man with white hair and beard, holding a long pole and shouting to Subai, who was lying on the shore, half of his body already soaked by the rising river water. "Talk." Subai opened his eyes, accompanied by a feeling of extreme hunger, but he did not go directly to catch the old fisherman and suck his blood to replenish himself. He just waved his hand to indicate that he was fine, then got up from the ground, looked at the direction, and chose to walk back towards the county seat. In fact, Subai knew in his heart that he could not go any further. The horror broadcast would not allow him to be too far away from the place where the story happened, let alone travel around the world. Once he insisted on staying away from the county seat, he might various unexpected punishments will appear. This is a tacit understanding between the audience and the horror broadcast. However, at this moment, the cry of a child suddenly came from the old man's boat. Sudbai's body trembled, he stopped, turned around, and looked at the fishing boat. At this time, the old man hurriedly leaned into the fishing boat, then took the child out and coaxed him on the bow of the boat. "Oh oh oh, be good and don't make trouble, oh oh oh, don't cry, don't cry." The first time he saw the child, Sudbai knew clearly that this was the little guy born by the fox. The little guy seemed to sense that Sudbai was near him and struggled to get out of the old man's arms. He turned around and saw the little guy standing there. Sudbai by the river stretched out her hands, asking for a hug. Sudbai pursed his lips and said nothing. The old man doted on the child and wrapped it in cloth. "Don't move, be good, be careful of catching a cold, poor child." "Old sir, can you give me a ride?" Sudbai asked. The old man looked at Sudbai's obviously bloody and damaged clothes. Without much hesitation, he nodded and said, "Sure, come up." After finishing speaking, the old man held the child in one hand and held the pole with the other, pulling the small fishing boat closer to the shore. Sudbai jumped on the boat. The little guy was so happy that he jumped out of the old man's arms and was caught by Sudbai. "Ha ha, he likes you." The old man smiled kindly when he saw this scene. Sudbai held the little guy in his arms, and the little guy kept rubbing his forehead against Sudbai. He was very affectionate. Even Sudbai himself didn't know why this little guy was so close to him. Perhaps, what is even more unclear now is the monk and the others. They don't understand why Sudbai is so desperate to protect the child since he won't eat him. When a child is just born, his innocent heart has not been tainted by the world, so sometimes his instinctive feeling is very sensitive. "Where are you going, young man?" Sudbai smiled and said, "Don't you ask me why I am so close to this child? Don't you ask me about my clothes." The old man just nodded silently, then looked at Sudbai carefully and confirmed. "Nothing to ask. I picked up this child from the river. You should have taken care of it before. The child is smart and can remember." "This is a good thing," the old man said lightly to avoid the important matter. "So, you're not going to give him back to me? House hung, I think you are destined, ahem." The old man seemed to feel that what he planned to say was too direct, so he asked instead, "House hung, may I ask if the two elders in the family are safe?" "I know what you're going to say." Sudbai naturally knew what the old man meant. It was simply that he was destined to be alone. The death of his parents was a good explanation. And this child could not bring him out of the story world. He continued to stay by his side. When his mission is completed, he will be sent away directly by the terrorist broadcast, and this child will be the only one left by then. "Yes," the old man responded and looked at Sudbai, "so, the best destination for this child is to follow me. I will take good care of him." "How many years can you old guy live?" Sudbai laughed and scolded. The old man was not angry. He counted on his fingers and replied, "I don't know how many years I can live. I only know that I am already over 120 years old this year." Hearing these words, Sudbai was stunned for a moment. He thought that the old man was just a layman Taoist priest who could read faces and know some skills, but he didn't expect that he was actually a real Taoist. "It's really a bit hidden." Sudbai directly reached out to grab the old man's neck, but the old man didn't move and let Sudbai pinch his neck. "What do you use to prove your age?" Sudbai didn't exert any force on his fingers, and just looked at the old man calmly. The old man shook his head. "I don't know it myself, because at my age, I have actually spent most of my life on dogs." Sudbai let go of his hand. "If you can't prove it, I can't give you this child." Although the old man picked up the child from the river and did not eat it directly, he may have really good intentions, or he may not see the child's background and the benefits of eating him, but if the child encounters someone who really knows the way in the future, what should people do? Subai himself didn't know why he had to think about the future safety of this child so deliberately. His connection with the story world would only be severed after the mission was over, and this story world would never have anything to do with him, and in his previous experiences, Subai only treated the people in this story world as NPCs, without much emotion or regard them as human beings. The old man pondered for a while, and then said, "Actually, there is no way to prove it. For example, the mottled aura on your body is obviously that of a zombie, but it also carries other auras, such as those of a living person, and some that I have never seen before." Subai glanced at the old man and said nothing. The old man stretched out his hand and put it on Subai's shoulder. "Young man, you must be a member of the Devil's Path, right? Your cultivation method is too domineering, and it is easy to drain your own life potential. It is very inconsistent with my philosophy. If you fart, hurry up." Subai looked a little impatient. The old man took out a brocade box from his arms and handed it to Subai. "I have a continuous pill that I refined myself, which can harmonize the body's chi. I'll give it to you." Subai opened the box and saw a light blue elixir. He was not afraid of the old man poisoning the elixir. After all, with his own constitution, it would be very difficult to poison himself. He had heard that zombies were poisoned. Dead. Subai picked up the elixir and put it into his mouth. The elixir melted in his mouth, like cotton candy. This surprised Subai. Immediately afterwards, Subai felt a calm and peaceful breath pouring into his body. Within his body, his vampire bloodline and zombie bloodline suddenly became quiet, like a docile kitten, which played a great assisting role in maintaining his bloodline and switching bloodlines. When Subai raised his head and looked at the old man again, he found that he was already standing by the river, and the fishing boat was already drifting away. There seemed to be a child calling him on the boat. Subai looked at his feet again, which was where he had just slept. Did he not get on the boat at all? Main Mission 1 has been completed, now Main Mission 2 is announced. The sound of a terrifying broadcast came from his mind, and Subai suddenly laughed silently. "You are really old-fashioned, and you made a scene where you asked the old man to give you a pill as a reward after completing the task. Is the story you pursue and want just this kind of nonsense? Like this, it's too boring." However, soon, Subai couldn't laugh anymore, because the content of Main Task 2 had been announced. Main Mission 2, bring the baby back to the demon cave. Task period, 30 days. Mission rewards will be announced after the mission is completed. If the mission fails, 3,000 story points will be deducted. Those with insufficient story points will be eliminated immediately. Subai, who was standing by the river, looked at the fishing boat that had disappeared in front of him. In the wind. Somewhat messy. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 122. Tisk, tisk, that guy Abai was too cruel. The fat man rolled the cooked eggs on Gyatso's face while he kept muttering, "Oh, you are really the same, he is mentally ill, I want to fight you desperately, but you actually did it with him. Isn't this stupid? If it really turns out to be 3 long and 2 short, why bother?" Gyatso closed his eyes and let the fat man treat him. His physical condition was very poor now, and what was different from Subai was that Subai could rely on his vampire blood to recover, but he only needed fresh blood for support. This is not very difficult, and Subai is not the kind of person with moral obsessiveness. However, Gyatso was injured and could only rely on his own body and ability to recover slowly. Under equal conditions, he could fight Subai head-on. From a long-term perspective, Gyatso was actually very unwise. The most important thing is that Gyatso failed to win the duel. In the end, Subai won the real outcome. Gyatso really failed to win, which is even more of a loss. The fat man's face was still very pale at this time, but he was better than before. Obviously, although the pattern of corpse poison attacking the heart has not changed, it is at least slightly relieved than before. It can be seen that although the fat man said before that he would eat and wait until the end of the story, but judging from his actual actions, this guy was obviously unwilling to do so. Gyatso didn't bother to pay attention to the fat man's endless chatter. After the fat man helped him deal with the wound, he got up and sat cross-legged on the ground to meditate. Boring gourd. The fat man shook his head, walked to the bed, and continued to lie down. There were already a lot of paper charms drawn around him. Of course, the effect was actually very ordinary, not as good as those exchanged in the WeChat store, but it was still better than nothing. They can't really lie in bed and sleep all the time, and Fatty himself knows that with his current serious injury and lack of value, if he encounters any danger, they can really throw him away like a burden. Throw it away. In the story world, the most reliable person is yourself. When the notification sound of the completion of main task 1 appeared and main task 2 was released, Gyatso, who had been meditating with his eyes closed all night, suddenly opened his eyes. The fat man also jumped out of bed in a hurry. If the mission fails, 3,000 story points will be deducted. This is killing people. Previously, 300 story points were deducted for failure of the main task 1. For a few people, it was still within the tolerance range. Even if the main task 1 failed, it didn't matter. If you can get obvious benefits from taking a bite of the child's meat, it is still a good deal. It is equivalent to it's the same as spending 300 story points to redeem rewards. But 3,000 story points, who can save 3,000 story points? The last additional message of the terror broadcast could actually be changed directly to, mission failed, erase immediately. The fat man patted his forehead and circled around Gyatso, asking, Gyatso, you said before that before you re-entered the inn, Subai threw the child directly into the river and then started a fight with you, right? Gyatso nodded. Apparently, he had also thought of the question that the fat man thought of. So, are you sure Subai can find the child who was thrown into the river again? The fat man asked. Obviously, if Subai didn't eat the child, forget it, and then threw the child into the river to prevent it from being eaten, and now everyone can't find the child, then the fun would be really great. Moreover, the worst case scenario is that Subai does not eat the child and does not want others to eat it. If the child cannot swim, he is thrown into the river and drowned by Subai. In that case, everyone will be blinded together. Other people may not be able to do this kind of thing that is not beneficial to oneself and others, but it is definitely possible for Subai to do it now. God knows what is going on in his mind. The child probably wouldn't have drowned, because after he finished fighting with me, he walked downstream. Gyatso recalled. It proves that he had enough confidence that the child would not drown, but he fought with me after that. The injuries were about the same as mine. Judging from the speed of the water flow, it was almost impossible for him to find the child last night. The fat man breathed a sigh of relief. No matter what, let's find the child first. Amitba, go find the child first. A Buddhist chant sounded from outside the house. No need to guess who is coming. There was a black fox lying on the monk's shoulder. It kept looking around, looking very cautious. At the same time, it held onto the monk's clothes tightly, not daring to move even half a step away. Gyatso glanced at the fox, then at the monk, with a smile on his lips. You should have originally intended to refine her essence, at least to produce an inner elixir. However, the release of main mission 2 caused you to terminate your previous plan. The monk nodded and reached out to touch the fox hair on his shoulders. Mother and child are connected. Although she has lost her previous memory and abilities, she still has the most basic sensing ability. The fat man wanted to laugh but did not dare to laugh at this time. Monk, You are still more powerful. That fox was so majestic and terrifying in the demon cave before, but now it has been made into a pet by you. That fox also committed evil in the previous life, so let her do it this time met you. Amitba, the fate of the past life and the fruit of this life. The monk didn't want to get too entangled in this topic, and just said, let's find the child's location now. It can vaguely sense a direction, at least it won't make us aimless. Gyatso stood up with some difficulty. I recovered while walking. Since it is a 30-day mission, I think I should have enough time to recover. After speaking, Gyatso looked at the fat man. The fat man shrugged and took out a small bottle from his arms. These are the guanyin tears that I work so hard to do a favor for a senior listener. Don't worry, I will have no problem detoxifying them. Obviously, the fat man also knew that neither Gyatso nor the monk believed that he had no options at all, so they were forcing him into the palace. If the fat man really couldn't walk or run, then they would really leave him alone. We went together. Fortunately, Fatty lived up to expectations. He really had a backup plan, guanyin tears. The name of this thing makes it very precious. When Sudbai saw Fatty for the first time, Fatty took away the bronze box. When he saw Fatty for the second time, Fatty probably went to do something for Lychee and came back to his life specially. This is enough to show that Fatty is no matter in the story world. Whether in the real world or in the real world, he is very diligent in running private jobs. Most of the miscellaneous things on him come from this. The fox pointed the way, and the three of them left Yizhuang together, but when leaving, they passed by the wing where Lin Zhenying lived. The monk stopped and asked, has Lin Zhenying never come out since then? Never came out, the fat man replied. Ignore him. He must have been stimulated by something last time. There must be something wrong with him. Pay attention first. Let's find the child first and then see what happened to him when we return to this county. Sudbai knew that he couldn't catch up with the small fishing boat, but he didn't feel too sorry for himself. Horror broadcasters were just like this, and they would kill the listeners for the sake of the so-called story. Fortunately, after a night of recovery and the elixir given by the old man, Sudbai's condition was adjusted very well, compared with the fat man who was poisoned, Gyatso who was severely beaten, and the monk who suffered the backlash of his oath. Sudbai is considered to be in the best condition. Of course, the pros and cons are that Sudbai now has to act alone, while the other three should be together. After walking down the river for a while, Sudbai got on an official road. From here on, the official road basically followed the direction of the river. After walking on the official road for about half an hour, a knight delivering a message came towards Sudbai from in front of him. Judging from the clothes of the knight, he should be a soldier at the inn. When the opponent rode past him, Sudbai stepped forward with one hand, pulled the opponent off the horse, and then punched him unconscious. At this time, because of the elixir, Sudbai he didn't need blood to replenish himself. Before he felt hungry for blood, Sudbai would not even say that he would suck human blood for fun and enjoyment. He left the guy beside the grass and Sudbai got on the horse. Sudbai's equestrian skills were not very good, but when he was a child, his father took him to ride a horse on the Zishuan grassland. He still remembered the basic essentials of riding a horse. And this horse seems to be able to sense the special aura on Sudbai's body, and it seems very docile when Sudbai rides on it. In this way, Sudbai followed the river all the way downstream. At night, we passed a small town. Before, Sudbai didn't dare to move forward because according to the storyline, he was running further and further away. But with the promulgation of the main mission too, there was no problem. It was like the story background map was opened up again. A big new area. When they arrived at the town, Sudbai was still a little curious. The knight at the inn hadn't even reported that his horse had been robbed. Or maybe the transportation and information transmission in this era were so backward that he was free for a whole day or something. Nothing happened, but I was a little uncomfortable with it. After tying the horse to a manger in front of an inn, Subai walked into the inn and ordered some dishes and a pot of wine. While waiting for the food to arrive, Subai wanted to ask the waiter of the store to find out the origin of the old man. He thought that if the old man hadn't lied to him, he should be a real Taoist who was already over 120 years old. The realm should also be a well-known figure. However, before Subai could wave to the waiter, he was stunned. He suddenly found a painting hanging on the wall behind him. The painting shows a Taoist priest with an immortal demeanor, but the Taoist priest's appearance is actually 70% similar to that old man. There is a word next to it. Master Zhang Tianqi of Fulong Mountain is here, all evil spirits should retreat. The co-author is indeed very famous, and is used as a door god to ward off evil spirits and ensure safety. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 123. Fulong Mountain is not far from this town. After Subai had a meal here, he led his horse towards Fulong Mountain. When he reached the foot of the mountain and looked at the winding mountain road, Subai took this. The horse simply stayed here and went up the mountain on his own. Unlike mountain climbing in later generations, where you can ride on a cable car, which is very convenient and simple, now you can only climb the mountain on foot, and the mountain roads are not carefully designed, and you have to climb over some places by yourself. These are not very difficult for Subai, but Subai is afraid that if the old man is no longer on Fulong Mountain, but wanders around with the little guy, then he will be completely blind, but thinking that since the horror broadcast after issuing this mission, it was impossible to ask the old Taoist priest to travel across the sea, leaving the audience with no hope or solution. When he climbed halfway up the mountain, Subai found a pavilion. The pavilion was made of wood and looked crumbling. It was a good place to enjoy the scenery. Subai walked in and took a rest. At the same time, Subai also needed to spend some time thinking about some things, such as how to bring the little guy back even if he found the old man's whereabouts. Before the main mission 2 was released, Subai thought it would be a good outcome for the little guy to follow the old man. But as soon as the main mission 2 was released, Subai had to come back to pick up the little guy, and even take him with him. Returning to the demon cave is tantamount to pushing the little guy into the fire pit with your own hands. But Subai had no choice. If the deduction was 300 story points, Subai might just give up on the task. But with the deduction of 3000 story points, Subai had no choice at all. After sitting in the pavilion for a while, Subai was about to climb the mountain again. An old woman came down below. The old woman was carrying a basket with incense, candles, paper money. The old woman stopped by the pavilion. She seemed to be tired, so she entered the pavilion, sat opposite Subai, took out a rice dumpling from the basket, peeled it open and ate it herself. He completely regarded Subai as air. Subai wanted to ignore her and leave first, but one detail made Subai stay. Even someone with Subai's physique needed to be out of breath when climbing halfway up the mountain, but the old woman actually had no sweat stains on her body. None of them were left behind. Although it was cool in the mountains, climbing was also a tiring job. What made Subai feel even more weird was that the soles of the old woman's shoes didn't even have a little bit of sand or dirt on them. The 1000-layer cloth shoes were so clean that it made people feel a little unnatural, as if they were new shoes that had just been made and hadn't been worn yet. Settling down. But this is simply impossible. There is no cable car here, and the steps in many places are not even repaired. Your clothes will be dirty along the way, not to mention the soles of your shoes. The old woman seemed to have noticed Subai's gaze, and was a little surprised, saying, "Young man, are you hungry?" "Old lady, I have a meat rice dumpling here for you to eat." "No, I'm not hungry," Subai refused. The old woman nodded, finished eating the rice dumplings slowly, packed them up, and started on the road again. Subai also went out together, separated from the old woman by more than 10 meters. The old woman didn't walk slowly, even a little too fast. Often after passing a corner, when Subai came up, he would find that the distance between him and the old woman had suddenly widened. This happened several times in a row, and Subai knew clearly that the old woman was walking too fast. I want to throw myself away. Moreover, when passing through some muddy roads, Subai didn't even see the footprints of the old woman in front of him. Is she a human or a ghost? Subai didn't know if he turned into a zombie and used his evil spirit to force and stimulate the other party. If he was a ghost, he would appear as a result, but he thought that this was a Taoist Dharma place, not as good as the previous one in the county. Lin Zhenying, if he acts recklessly here, will he attract the attention of those Taoist priests, and dozens of Taoist priests will come down directly and shout that they want to help the heavens and kill him? Subai really didn't dare to gamble. Continuing to follow, as they approached their destination, a stone tablet appeared in front of them. There were a few words written on the stone tablet in a language that Subai didn't recognize. The old woman knelt down in front of the stone tablet, and then began to light candles and burn paper money. Subai pursed his lips, wondering what this old woman meant. If she didn't go to the Taoist temple on the mountain to worship, what was she doing here? Just as Subai walked past the old woman and continued up the mountain, the old woman suddenly said, "Young man, don't go forward. The place ahead is not for people like us to go." Subai was stunned. There was obviously something in the old woman's words. "Why?" Subai asked. "You know it in your own heart." The old woman began to burn the paper money. The paper money fell out and turned into fly ash in the air, looking very lonely. "I want to find someone," Subai said. "As you go," the old woman lowered her head and began to kowtow. "Who are you worshipping?" Subai asked. "Dead man." The old woman clasped her hands together and began to recite some scripture. "I thought it was burned for the dead. Are they your relatives?" The old woman looked at Subai in surprise and said with a smile, "Young man, I am burning paper money for you so that you will not have to worry about food and clothing on your way to hell." Suddenly, Subai felt that the mountain under his feet was shaking, as if an earthquake had occurred. Subai subconsciously squatted down, lowered his center of gravity, and at the same time grabbed the ground with both hands, but there was nothing under his hands, and he seemed to be flying in the air. Just like that, Subai fell down immediately. Hoo-hoo. Subai suddenly opened his eyes and found that he was sitting in the pavilion, his body already wet with cold sweat. There is no old woman in the pavilion, and there are no rice dumplings. Is this just a dream? Subai didn't believe that this was just a dream. It was not such a coincidence that he would have such a dream here. No matter whether this dream has other meanings, Subai cannot give up going up the mountain. If he cannot complete the task, he will die. This dream means that he may die, but the essence is almost the same. Subai got up and climbed the mountain again. What made Subai a little strange was that the road conditions up the mountain were different from those in his dream. Moreover, when he reached the top, he could understand the words on the stone tablet. Fulong Temple. It is very common for Taoist temples to be named after mountains. Subai took a deep breath and walked past the stone monument. However, a piece of paper dust suddenly fell at Subai's feet and stuck to the upper of Subai's boots. Subai squatted down and flicked the paper ash away. "Okay, come down the mountain." Subai turned around and started walking down the mountain. It was easy to go up the mountain, and it was easy to go down the mountain. A carriage drove into a small town at the foot of Fulong Mountain, and the driver was a fat man. The fat man shouted to the two monks in the carriage and asked if he wanted to stay in a hotel here, have a good meal and sleep well before moving on, but the monks in the carriage refused directly. As a last resort, the fat man had no choice but to buy some dry food first. The three grown men continued to move forward in the carriage while swallowing the unpalatable dry food with water. The carriage continued to move forward and stopped at a roadside tea house at the foot of the mountain. After all, we are about to climb a mountain, so we still need to make some necessary preparations. The fat man impatiently went down to ask the store if they had any cooked beef or other food. He was accompanied by 2 monks along the way, and he was really short of fuel and water. Fortunately, although the store didn't have cooked beef, they did have some bacon, sausages, etc. The fat man asked the store to cook quickly, and now he sat down at the table. Gyatso and the monk came back from fetching water. They originally planned to go up the mountain overnight without wasting time, but seeing the fat man already sitting there waiting, they smiled at each other and sat down at the table. Soon, plates of very simple stir-fried vegetables were served. The fat man enjoyed the meal very much. The clear soup had been watery for a while, and he had to climb a mountain, so he naturally needed to replenish his food. The monk and Gyatso also ate some. The monk also asked the shopkeeper to prepare some dry food suitable for long-term storage. The shopkeeper immediately went down to prepare it. I said, "We didn't see Abai all the way. Could it be that that guy hasn't found the road yet?" The fat man drank a large bowl of soup and patted his belly and said. Gyatso shook his head, "He may be mentally ill, but he's not stupid. But he should be at least 1 day ahead of us. Maybe he is already on the mountain now. Is it that fast? Why is the child's position sensed by the fox still on the mountain?" The fat man asked, a little puzzled. Is it possible that Abai went up the mountain first, but still didn't accomplish anything, and now he is still working as a foreigner on the mountain? It would be great if the task could be completed so easily. Gyatso's complexion has improved significantly recently. Obviously, although his injuries have not fully recovered, he is still in good condition. After eating, "Let's go up the mountain overnight." The monk put down his chopsticks to indicate that he was done eating. "Why are you in such a hurry?" Fatty was really a little dissatisfied. "How long has it been since the 30-day mission? Why are you in such a hurry?" But Gyatso also put down his chopsticks, indicating that he was done eating. The fat man had no choice but to pay the bill, and then carrying the package, the three of them walked towards the mountain road under the cover of night. The shopkeeper took the money and didn't even bother to clean the table. He just abandoned his tea shop and ran out. He ran all the way to a mass grave. A young man stood in front of a lonely grave. "Master, the people you told me to pay attention to have arrived, and now they have gone up the mountain. They look very anxious," the shopkeeper said to the young man. The young man nodded and threw a silver nugget from his sleeve. The shopkeeper picked it up excitedly and bit it with his teeth. Seeing the young man waving his hand, he immediately left knowingly. The solitary grave in front of Subai had actually been opened by him just now. There was a female corpse wrapped in a straw mat inside. The female corpse was already decaying, but there was a bamboo basket in the grave that had been well preserved. In the bamboo basket, there are also 2 rice dumplings. The lotus leaves are withered and yellow, but when you peel off the inside, you can see that they are meat rice dumplings. If something really happens on the mountain, when I come back, you can give me a dream. If you have any unfulfilled wishes, I will do my best." After finishing speaking, Subai grabbed a handful of earth and sprinkled it on the lonely grave.